dreamed of, forsaken I am. Damned, a distant calling draws me near. A faithless life is my one and only fear. Rescue me. Oh, somebody save me. Rescue me. Oh, somebody save me. Forgotten journey I must make. Rip from the pages, secrets I can't shake. A distant calling draws me near. A reckless life is my one and only fear. Rescue me. Oh, somebody save me. Rescue me. Oh, somebody save me. Let me know. Should I let you go? Let me know. Should I let you go?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We are here once again with the Justice Hour with attorney Pamela S. Roth.
Good afternoon, Jim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all my listeners and viewers all over Long Island and New York. Thank you for tuning in again to this week's edition of the Justice Hour with me as your host, attorney Pamela S. Roth. I am very pleased today to share with you our guest for today, which is John Curley. John Curley is a private investigator. He has his own investigative firm called J. Curley and Associates. And John is also an author and a child rights advocate. So I would like everybody to please meet John Curley. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Pam and Jim, for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. You and I had a very nice conversation as we drove out from Brooklyn, and I have to tell you something. You know, I know you outside of today's interview because I have dealt with your investigative firm and consulting firm J. Curley and Associates. But in getting to know you beyond that, I am very pleased and fascinated by other work that you do. So I was hoping that you can, over the next hour, we can discuss these various topics that are very near and dear to your heart.
I would be happy to.
Well, why don't we first start with, tell us all a little bit about yourself. You are, of course, a private investigator, is that true?
Yes, I'm a licensed private investigator in the state of New York. I also am part of a 501(c) corporation. We're waiting on our final paperwork to come back from the government, but we operate as a group until then without taking in money. 4C is a lobbying agency, and it's called the Child Protection Constituency. I also write, and in my writing, which is primarily crime fiction, I usually make reference to child abuse and the inadequacies of the court system to deal with it.
Now, have you been working through or with the court system over the years as a private investigator?
I first started Friday the 13th in March of 1987, and I know everybody's saying he looks too young. However, it's been 30 years that I've been working as a private investigator.
And what type of cases do you handle?
I handle the broad spectrum like a lot of people. We do, my firm currently handles everything from criminal cases and negligence cases like most investigators do. Some of our clients are actually Fortune 500 companies. We do consulting work. We do everything from high-end security to workplace violence consulting. We provide expert witnesses for testimony. Pretty much almost everything that's involved in this type of business.
And well, with J. Curley and Associates, your private investigative firm. Is it just you, or do you have other individuals working with you?
We do have a consulting group, at which point I have assembled a group of people that are spectacular experts in various individual fields. We have some very well-known people. We have former Police Commissioner Bernie Kerrick. We have Joseph Schmitz, the Honorable Joseph Schmitz, who was the Inspector General for the Department of Defense under Bush and was President Trump's Foreign Affairs advisor during his campaign. And if anyone was to peruse our website, I just have managed to pick the top-notch experts in each of their fields.
Now, the website, if anybody was interested, that would be J. Curley and Associates.
Spelled out correct, yes.
Okay, that's
.com.
jcurleyandassociates.com. If
Yes.
anyone is interested to go to John's website, and you can see for yourself the various experts that he has brought on board in his consulting firm. So I was going to ask you, you and I were speaking at length about children victims, and you're a children's rights advocate, is that correct?
I guess you could say that, yeah.
So is that part, I know you were explaining just now about a 501(c), and it's to protect the children?
Yes, well, we are basically attempting to do, the difference between a 3C and a 4C is a 3C is a not-for-profit organization.
Right.
A 4C is also a not-for-profit organization, but it's designated as a lobbying agency.
So as a lobbying agency, so you're lobbying for changes in the laws to protect children,
Yes.
is that correct?
Yes, well, actually, we would like some laws that could actually protect children. Usually, whenever politicians become involved, any attempt ends up being warped and non-productive, and it doesn't serve its initial purpose. The few times that politicians actually pay attention to child protection, they usually end up making it worse or having no effect at all.
But you know, if you look across the country, you know, almost everybody has children, whether through marriage or as single parents, they're adopting children, foster children. Why aren't there enough laws right now on the books to protect these children?
Because children themselves do not vote, they do not represent a voting bloc, and that's the purpose of having the lobbying agency. What we hope to do is to tell a politician, if you embrace this as part of your platform, we will send you our votes, we will work toward getting you elected. That's the way to make change. There is an organization called the Legislative Drafting Institute for Child Protection. They're a group of experts, I believe it is the brainchild of Andrew Vax, and anybody that is involved in child protection, you don't need to know who he is.
But Andrew Vax, he's the author, is that correct?
Yes, he's an author, he's an attorney, he's done everything from, he was a United Nations rep during the genocide in Biafra. He ran a juvenile detention facility for violent youths. And he's been a law guardian in New York City for 40 plus years. And he's handled these type of cases, and his approach, which we adopt, is extremely logical and beneficial towards actually helping children.
Now, when we speak of helping children, what we're specifically speaking about are children who are victims of horrific crimes, basically being attacked by sexual predators, raped, abused, and the abuse can either be sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse, and emotional abuse. Did I leave anything out?
Neglect.
Or neglect. So we're specifically speaking about laws being changed, or if not changed, being developed and drafted in order
Yes.
to protect these children.
There were animal protection laws in most states before there was any sort of law pertaining to protecting children. Children, one of the main problems, aside from the fact that they're not a voting bloc and they don't care, is they are perceived as property. How often have you heard the phrase, not with my kid, my child, my child? Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not. As a matter of fact, in New York, there used to be something called the incest loophole. And what that meant was, if you rape your neighbor's child who's 11 years old, say, you're a monster and you should go to jail if convicted. That's something I think we can all agree on. If you rape your own 11-year-old child, well, you're sick and you need help. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that.
So that
predators.
person was not getting, there was no jail term, there was nothing
The
imposed?
sentencing guidelines and everything that would happen was considerably different than if it was a predator that was an immediate genetic family.
So if it was outside the family unit, it was looked upon very differently than if it was within the family?
Exactly, yes. That was on the books for years, I believe over 100 years. Mr. Vax and a group of very dedicated, very good politicians got together around 2005 and they closed that. They actually fought Sheldon Silver, the singular most powerful politician there has been in New York since Boss Tweed. And for some reason, Mr. Silver wanted to keep that open. They won, it was closed. There are other states, I believe, that have similar problems, but that's an example of how you can marshal the troops and rally people together and make something important. There was just recently the Failed Child Victims Act, which the proponents of which were screaming, we're going to help kids, and if you're not voting for this, you're turning your back on kids. And the only thing that it was addressing was the current statute in New York for prosecuting or effecting a civil suit against a child predator. It runs when the victim turns 23. That's absurd. The victim could still be living with the predator. The victim could be in the army to have gotten away. There's a plethora of things that are wrong. Maybe they're in a psychiatric coma. That's wrong. What they wanted to do was something equally absurd and remove the statute of limitations from that. So we're going to go from very few people can bring it to anybody can bring it, and we're going to flood the court system, and we're going to have 90-year-olds being accused of something by 70-year-olds that might have happened, 75 years ago. It's absurd.
So right now, you have to have the statute of limitations being changed.
That has to change. There's no question that it has to change. But the advocates of this law were screaming, how's it going to save? It's not. It didn't address longer sentences for predators. It didn't address the multiple problems with Megan's Law. Another joke. It didn't do anything like that. What it ended up being was a volleyball between the trial lawyers, lobbyists who are looking at this salivating, saying, I'm going to get so many cases out of this, and other groups like the Catholic Church. And I'm not speaking bad about Catholics individually or attorneys individually. But now you have groups like that are going to get slaughtered if there's no statute of limitations. That's insane.
Right, but not to interrupt you, but that's what's happening right now with a lot of these cases that are coming out against the church. You have children who were very young at the time, that were abused by
Right.
priests,
Right.
and now they're in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and they're suddenly coming out of the woodwork claiming, well, I was a victim of child abuse, and you're finding now a lot of these priests may be in their 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Right.
To go
There
forward.
are-
There's got to be a statute of
Sure,
limitations.
there-
You
right.
can't just keep bringing this up for so
Right.
many years.
Well, I mean, look, you can go back to ancient Greece, and Demosthenes, I believe his name was complaining 3,000 years ago about professional plaintiffs. You can't have that. But this entire effort ended up being nothing but a farce, and then a volleyball between two political lobbies. It couldn't get enough support, and it was killed. And it wasn't going to save the children. That's absurd. It wasn't going to do anything. What it did was, what I don't want are laws that are going to, look, children that are victimized, to me, is as serious as murder. When people ask me what the most serious case that I've ever worked on, or what the most serious type of case I work on, people expect to hear answers, homicide cases. I mean, I've worked on many homicide cases. Some of them have garnered national attention. Andre Rands comes to mind for Dwayne Felton in Staten Island. That's, as adults, if we go to court and we lose a case, we're equipped to deal with that. Okay? If the guy doesn't get convicted on your test, there's ways for adults to deal with it. If the judge on a child custody case makes the wrong decision, the child is sent home with the abuser as a trophy. There's nothing more serious than that to me. These attempts at supposedly making things better by removing a statute, what we're going to do, and I argued against it repeatedly, you're going to flood a system that already does not take nearly enough money and put it towards child protection with all new expenses, and the court calendar is going to be clogged. That's insane. There are reasonable alternatives. Raise the age to 35. Raise the age. Have a clause that if you can get an independent psychiatrist to say the person was in fact in a psychiatric coma because the abuse was so terrible, but an accredited psychiatrist, then waive the statute, or have a longer statute for criminal cases where the evidence of proof is higher in order to convict, and then you can have a civil case if there's a conviction. There's a lot of other alternatives other than this nonsense that was put forth by a group of people who didn't actually have child welfare in mind.
But a lot of these people right now, when you speak of these issues, they don't have the actual child or children really in their best interest. Otherwise, a lot of these laws would have already been either drafted or implemented all this time.
It's never a major concern.
But like you said, right now you're saying that the politicians are not concerned that much with children because children are not a voting bloc. But does anyone stop to think that children do not remain children forever? These children will grow.
See, right.
They're going to grow into adults. They're going to grow into a
Right.
voting bloc. And they're going to remember, okay, who was there for me when I needed help? So now, why should I vote for this politician versus that one? Because nobody is still speaking to me as to what can be changed and what could have been done.
Right. Andrew Vax coined a phrase called, where he terms victims of child abuse children of the secret. If all of the children of the secret were to rise up and vote together, unified, they would be unstoppable. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. You have, mainly because people don't try to educate themselves about this, okay? Being a victim is a horrible thing, but it does not make you an expert in anything except for your own pain. You can't just say, well, if that was the case, everybody that had a heart attack would be a cardiologist. It doesn't work like that. You need to educate yourself. There are insane ideas that are put forth, like civil commitment laws. You're a defense attorney,
Yes.
okay? Civil commitment laws basically say he's sick. He raped 20 kids in the last 10 years. He's sick. He needs help. He needs to be put into an institution. So, okay, if you put these civil commitment laws into play, that is a defense attorney's dream. Of course he raped 20 kids because he's sick. How'd you like to have that in your arsenal? It's insane. Megan's Law. A beautiful child is abducted and murdered, and what they do.
Let me just interrupt for a second, just to educate the viewers and listeners right now who may not be familiar with what Megan's Law is. Megan's Law is it was a federal law that was put into place and named after a young child. Her name was Megan Kanka, and she was abducted, raped, and murdered. And so when the federal government developed this law called Megan's Law, that was for to require law enforcement authorities to make available to the public a regulation where registered sex offenders would have to register as to where it is that they're living for them to be monitored, so that actually, any one of us right now can actually go to a website to find out. It's a sex offender registry. You would type in your zip code to see what registered sex offenders live in your area. And I did that. I was just curious to see how it worked, and it's really frightening. With these little X's or little demarcations come up on the computer, alerting you as to, by their name, who are registered sex offenders living in your neighborhood. And when you do this and you find this out, it is extremely frightening, to the point where you really don't even want your child to leave the house. Now, the next question is, and this is something I was discussing with John, is, of course, that just because these sex offenders register under Megan's Law, and they're registered because that's what they're required to do under maybe the plea agreement that they make with their defense attorney and with their court case, there's not enough funding that actually can go out to everybody's home to actually ensure that this person who is a registered sex offender is actually still residing in that location. Because just like we know people warrant and they don't show up to court, there's nothing really that's holding these people to actually maintaining that address. So as much as they're registered at these locations, who's to say that they're actually living there? Is that correct?
That's correct. But on its face, Megan's Law is absurd. What they're basically doing, politicians and the people that vote for them, and that's a key thing, because we keep putting the same people in office. They're saying, look, first of all, predatory pedophiles, and there's a difference between a pedophile, a person that experiences sexual urges towards children, and a predatory pedophile who acts on them. Many children of the secret have those feelings, are greatly disturbed by them, and seek help for them. The predatory pedophile is not, yes, it is violent, but he's not sick, he's happy with his behavior. So they'll tell you if you ever get the chance to speak with them. This is what I don't see anything wrong with this. There are organizations like NAMBLA which bills itself as a child mentoring group. Okay, they're sociopaths. They are not sick. They act on it. The difference between sick and evil is behavior. Like I said, there are many children that are molested that have these feelings. They're disturbed by them. They seek help. These people see nothing wrong with that. Okay, so what the politicians are saying, we're going to take these monsters, and remind me because I want to discuss that a little further. They want to take these monsters that enjoy hurting children, and they're not going to put them away for life so that they can't go out and hurt more children. So what they're going to do to make that up to you is, well, we're going to tell you where they live, but we're not going to make sure that they're there because we don't have the money for that. But it'll make you feel better.
So basically it's just kind of like putting a Band-Aid on it.
It's
appeasing everybody.
Garbage. They'd be better off without it.
So it's a joke.
Yes. Let me ask you a question. I think, anybody watch The Walking Dead?
I love that show.
Does our producer watch The Walking Dead?
Oh, you gotta watch it. It starts
All right.
next week, October 22nd, 9th season.
Let's look at this for a second. Imagine this possible scenario. Imagine this. There is a creature. Pick whatever kind of creature you like out of folklore that's appealing. And these creatures frequently and consistently attack our children, the future of our race, on a regular basis, and leave them broken and bloodied and destroyed. And say, for argument's sake, some of them, some percentage, we don't know, but some percentage of the children that are attacked, 5%, 10%, are going to turn into these creatures.
So in other words,
imagine that was happening.
Right.
Could you imagine all of the politicians getting together and getting that photo op with pictures of the things and we're going to destroy this menace because we're going to protect our children? Wouldn't that happen?
it should happen, but
But
right now
that-
the politicians are thinking
Well-
about the here and now. I'm gonna say whatever I need to say so I can
Exactly.
get your vote and get in. Once I'm in, okay, oh, it's a problem.
Exactly.
We'll just put it over there because it's not that important.
That
because
is
it's
exactly
not
what
in my
happens.
face.
Yes. That is
That's
exactly what's happening now. All right, because if these things
Get out.
look like what was inside of them, they would be monsters, and they'd be clearly recognizable.
But the problem is they look like you and I and
Yes,
everybody else.
and they
in
don't
this
just look
suit.
like us. They are professionally adept at identifying at-risk children, working from within the circle of trust, another issue.
Yes.
Because everybody has, when they talk about child rape and child abuse, they imagine the paneled van pulling up and the guy in a ski mask jumping out and grabbing the kid.
No, it's the coach, it's the babysitter,
Right.
it's your math tutor.
It's somebody within the circle of trust.
Somebody that you feel
Statistically,
comfortable leaving the child with.
right, there are very few statistics that are accurate in child protection. You have people run around saying 1 in 5 children in New York is going to be abused. All right, when you say, well, where did you get that information? How was this study done? How was it checked for accuracy? They look at you slack-jawed with drool coming out because they're just repeating what they heard. okay? But statistically, you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than a stranger kidnapping your kid and putting him into a van. It does happen. I'm not saying don't be afraid of that, but you know, it's statistically about the same as getting struck by lightning.
Right, but if you look at cases that are around the country of children who are kidnapped, tortured, molested, strangled, and ultimately killed, if you look within the so-called circle of
It's
trust,
almost always circle of trust.
it could be, it's a sibling, it is a cousin's a relative, it's maybe the neighbor who lives next door or across the street, it's the coach, it's anybody who you felt comfortable leaving your child with, that your child would feel comfortable going off with, and never thinking, well, that person, I would never think that that person's the boogeyman because he or she doesn't look like the boogeyman.
Yes.
And there is that level of trust. And
Yes.
on top of it all, the child is afraid to say anything to the parent because the parent is going to think, well, how could that be possible? That's Uncle
And
Joe.
that has happened.
That's your coach.
You will
that's the
often
priest.
find, and this happens, and I have a very dear friend of mine that's worked with me. She recently called me about something like that happened within her family, and she was devastated, crushed that certain members of the family were rallying around the confessed abuser. The system itself is geared toward that. And look at Sandusky.
Yes.
Okay, I very rarely comment on, there are very few cases I will actually comment on that haven't resulted in a conviction because you have to have standards. We have to go by conviction. Otherwise you have these imbeciles running around talking about Hillary Clinton and Pizzagate.
Yes.
You have the accusations against Trump. Both of those instances turned out to be false. You have you have people that run around saying it's a specific group. It's the Jews, it's the Muslims, it's the Catholics. I've had one enlightened individual say to me, well, Muhammad was a pedophile, and my response was that, you know what, shit for brains, in the year 800, everybody married a 9-year-old girl. You can't judge historical figures
Based on
today's moral standards. That's absurd. You have all of these people that are jumping on board and trying to make claims about child protection that are actually using that. And let me anybody that tries to do that, we don't need your help, okay? You don't need to talk about things, these absurd Pizzagate things, because it's not that you care about kids, it's that you hate Hillary Clinton, which is understandable. It's not the accusations against Donald Trump. There were no convictions, and they popped up right at that's nonsense.
Like
You don't like Trump, that's understandable.
It's all conspiracy theories.
Right.
And again, and it's not going to the heart of the matter, which are children's rights and
Yes.
looking to protect the children. There are predators out there every single day. There's predators out there right now. Is anything being done right now to help any of these
No.
children? No, but everybody's running around flapping their gills about this politician or that politician, what he did, what she did.
It never comes up. Our congressman in Staten Island and part of Brooklyn, Dan Donovan, whom I used to admire, his answer, his sole contribution to child protection that I'm aware of, is there are dolls that pedophiles use, sex dolls that look like children. And he wants to stop that. He gave a press conference and he had some child protection advocate next to him. We're going to stop that. So basically, Dan, what you're saying is there are thousands. We have 350 plus million people in this country. So I'm going to infer that there are thousands of children being raped and abused right now. So you're going to take away the dollies while pedophiles are using the real thing, and that's your contribution. And then people that think they're helping child protection will make this post and say, this is something we got to stop. And by doing that, they're taking attention from the rest of the issues. They're looking at this micro issue and not looking at any of the other issues, and all they're doing is hurting it. That's the problem. If all of the children of the secret voted together, I mean, I would have voted for either presidential candidate that said, I am going to put a stop to this, or I'm going to do this. Florida, there was a federal law enacted by the Clintons that said children are supposed to be given guardians. In New York, we use law guardians.
Yes.
Okay, not always the best, but still far better than a non-legal person such as a counselor or something like that.
Well, just so everyone understands, in New York, in family court, a child is protected by the court appointing a law guardian for the child, and that is an attorney that's sole specific duty and responsibility is to protect that child while there's a pending case going on
Yes.
in family court in the state of New York. So this way, the mother or the father or both parties, each one of them would have their own attorney. The child will specifically have a law guardian, which is an attorney protecting that child's interests and rights.
Right. I have some complaints about how that system currently is and what constitutes their training, but you're better off with that than without. In Florida, they will give a person accused of raping a child an attorney if they can't afford one, but they will not give the child an attorney. There is a plethora of reasons why you would want an attorney to handle that. One of them is if the attorney doesn't do a good job when the child reaches age, he can sue the attorney for malpractice.
Right, or ineffective assistance of counsel.
Yes. So they're familiar with the law. They're not supposed to be afraid of the court. They're supposed to advocate for the child. And certain states like Florida do not have legal advocates for the children. That should change. Either presidential candidate could have said something about that. Nothing was said.
Well, in the last number of presidential elections, from what I can recall, nothing ever came out about children's rights. Do you
No.
have any?
You
any
recall a
opinion about
local
that?
election? Because I don't.
No, but right now that brings us to our next point. Right now, of course, you have who is acting in Staten Island as congressman, Republican congressman, is Dan Donovan.
Dan Donovan.
Dan
yes.
Donovan, for anybody who doesn't know, used to be the district attorney in Staten Island, and he has now taken over the seat for congressman. And I know that I have Congressman Michael Grimm, who has agreed to become a guest on my show within the next couple of weeks, and Congressman Grimm is looking to fight and get his seat back.
He is, and I was fortunate enough to meet with Mike Grimm a few weeks ago, and he has agreed to make child protection a key point in his platform. We are discussing the details about that. I happen to like Michael quite a bit, and thus far he is the only politician that has responded to any of our requests to make this an issue.
And you know what's really interesting about that? I've been watching a number of prior interviews that Congressman Grimm has given, and Congressman Grimm is single with no children, and it's really interesting that you have a single individual with no children, and he is making it an important part of his campaign to look to advocate for children's rights, for there to be changes in the laws,
Right.
as opposed to you have Dan Donovan and anybody else.
Well, we have three mayoral candidates, all right? You have Bill de Blasio, the singular most inept politician that there has been in the history of politics.
Yes.
You have Big Bird. He dumped another $1 billion, making ACS's budget $3 billion a year for the pre-K program, which I think is a good thing, okay? But why are kids still dying in foster care? Because none of the money goes to training the field workers. The field workers, your average one, 25 to 35 years old with a useless college degree that wants to help kids, that's going into the field in places where cops will only go in pairs and armed, overloaded with cases, no real training. They do most of their investigation off of a clipboard. That's not an investigation. And when something gets screwed up, they're the ones that catch the blame, and you're paying them less, and this is not digs at the sanitation department, but you're paying them less than the people that pick up our garbage. It's absurd.
True.
And not one mayoral candidate has said, all one of them had to say is, well, not, you know, as far as de Blasio goes, he was fighting with Cuomo about whether or not ACS had to be taken over by the state, and he did nothing about it. Okay,
Right,
so
but
he
that-
wouldn't,
that-
even if he came out for it, I'm not going to believe him. But all you need to do is to say, listen, if I'm elected, I am going to have an independent council of people that are going to recommend the overhauls, not my cronies, but experts, actual experts. They're going to tell us what to do with ACS, and we're going to institute those procedures. And that's somebody I would vote for. Very simple.
But before ACS, it was called BC, Bureau of Child Welfare.
Right.
And all they did was go from Bureau of Child Welfare to change the name of the organization to ACS. Nothing's been done. You still have the same exact workers, the same lack of training, the same lack of finances. If you go back historically, and this is a case I mentioned, I know it's from a long time ago, maybe a lot of viewers won't remember it, but there was a case many years ago, I believe it was in the 80s, it was when I was first in law school in the 80s, late 80s, very late 80s. And it was the case of, he was an attorney, Joel Steinberg and Hedda Nussbaum. And of course, Jim is shaking his head, he remembers this. And
It was horrible.
it was awful. Joel Steinberg was an attorney in New York, and he was supposed to, from one of his clients, he was supposed to be finding foster care for his client's child. And rather than do that, he illegally adopted, basically kidnapped, if you wanted to call it that, this child, and he brought this child, Lisa, home, and he was living at the time with a woman, Hedda Nussbaum. So he brings this child home for him and Hedda to raise, and the only problem is that he took this young child and put her into a house of hell, because this child lived in a home of nothing but physical, emotional, psychological torture and abuse and neglect, to the point where the child was found dead at the hands of both Joel Steinberg and Hedda Nussbaum.
Yeah, it was, but the thing is, there are cases like that now all the time.
Sure, but even from back then, nothing had been done. That was when it was called Bureau of Child Welfare.
Yes,
No
this is,
changes.
well, you just managed to hit upon a problem, though. People, the politicians have screwed this up beyond the point where it's possible to screw it up anymore. You have the conservatives that'll say it's the decline of the American family. God damn it, nobody did. All right, listen, you want to say that a home is more stable if there's a father around? I might agree with that, okay? But until recently, for most of the time we've been a country, child abuse was the norm. So the great American family isn't always that great. And sometimes you have monsters that have families. So you can't think that these problems are going to go away by restoring the greatness of the American family.
Right, but
Bullshit.
it's not but it's not always the father too that's the abuser.
No, it could be the mother.
Look,
But on
look at Casey Anthony.
Right,
The
well,
Casey
Casey
Anthony
Anthony,
case
yes.
from Florida.
Yes.
There's the mother's the abuser. So we can't always turn around and say,
Well-
because there's a father there, the father or the boyfriend's the abuser. Most of the time, you have the mother who is supposed to be the guardian. She's the Madonna. She's supposed to be the protector of the child that she birthed. And you have the mother now who is abusing and torturing the crap out of these kids. And either she's going to claim psychological abuse, she's going to claim that the boyfriend made her do it, or she wanted the children out of the way because the kids suddenly became inconvenient for her with the new
Right.
boyfriend.
Well, the
and
Casey
new
Anthony
relationship.
case was a disaster. That's the fault of the prosecutors.
And that was a Florida case.
Yeah, that is the fault of the prosecutors. You can't, and again, I don't want to replace one set of victims with another. There have to be legal standards. You cannot convict someone of murder if you don't know the cause of death, if there's no physical evidence, and you can't prove that she did it. So there was never, if the jury followed its instructions, going to be a conviction of murder for Casey Anthony. But there could have been a number of child neglect charges that she'd be in jail for 15 or 20 years had they followed through with it. That was the prosecutor's fault. But going back to what we were talking about, on the right you want the restoration of the American family, and on the left, well, they kind of think the kid should be state raised. That's both bullshit. What you need to do is to approach each investigation with professional, competent investigators, which will drastically reduce the number of false claims, which in my experience, I've seen false claims a lot. Other people might not. We all have different functions and roles within the system. But if you have a professionally trained investigator with experience, you cut down on the false claims and you find the truth as to what's happening. Each case must be approached without any preconceived notion, and you have to err on the side of caution for the child, and that has to be done professionally. These are very simple answers that could be instituted very easily. Okay, let's not have Bill, whatever his name
Bill
is.
de Blasio.
His taste leaves a bad name in my mouth.
No, his name leaves a bad taste in your mouth. They came
Right.
out the wrong way.
Okay, let's say he doesn't pay one of his cronies $500,000 a year to run ACS. Let's say he puts that money into training. There are things that can be done here.
But why
And
weren't
they're
they
not.
done if not with, okay,
Because
we had
nobody
de Blasio.
cares. We don't hold them accountable. We, the people that vote, do not hold them accountable. One thing I can tell you about our not-for-profit, the politician that says they're going to make it part of their platform will get our support and our help. I am the worst son of a bitch in the planet to be on the other side. Anybody that tells me on a handshake this is going to be part and they're not, I am going to be a thorn in that person's side until the next election. So what we need are people that are going to follow through and do something.
Well, that brings me to this. As you know, and you were talking about this, Mayor de Blasio just put a lot of money into his new campaign because, as you know, he won the primary. So as of right now, it looks like he could be the mayor again for the city of New York. But in his most recent TV advertisements, he's talking to, I'm a parent.
Yeah, he sees the world through the eye. He sees the world through a parent's eyes, is what he sees. Geez, that must be some parent.
And so,
Big Bird on crack, maybe. I don't know what kind of parent that is.
Right, but knowing what he knows about what goes on with these cases of abused children that fall through the cracks of ACS, how do you see him doing anything different, or will he do anything different with protecting the children?
I haven't heard anything. The first candidate that comes along that says all they need to do is to have a commission with someone appropriate. Mentioned Andrew Vax several times. There are people that you could get that are actual experts in child protection that could tell you what exactly is wrong with ACS and how it can be fixed, and you promise you're going to do what they say, regardless. That's good enough for me.
But this has been happening for so many years.
Exactly.
Before Mayor de Blasio was the mayor, before that you had Mayor Bloomberg. Okay, before him,
Giuliani,
you had Giuliani, you did
Dinkins,
okay.
Koch.
Right. So you know something? I bring up the Joel Steinberg and Hedda Nussbaum case from
Nothing's
back in the
changed.
80s. Okay, since then there have been other horrific crimes against children, with little children ending up dead, falling through the cracks of ACS.
Yeah.
Where you have children malnutrition, you have an 8 or 10-year-old that has the body weight and frame of a 4-year-old because the kid is covered in feces and lice and maggots, and there is just no food in the house at all. The parents or the mother's eating because she's easily about pushing maybe 200, 300 pounds, and you turn around, you find this kid like living in a room with feces smeared all over
Or a
the walls.
closet, or a cardboard box.
And then you have the ACS worker that goes, knocks on the door, has a checkboard, and for whatever reason, I don't even know if she's going to see the child, but according to this, it's like, oh, good, I spoke to the mom. Mom looks well fed. Oh, there's food in the refrigerator. Does she even bother to see the kid? No. And next thing you know, days later, where's the kid? Find out the child is dead. And it all comes back to like what happened. What happened is, why are these kids falling through the cracks?
Because what happens is every once in a while, rather than do something, we don't have a mayor. We do not have the head of a municipal corporation. We have some knucklehead who thinks he's the leader of his 60s movement.
Right, he's a figurehead because he's so busy running off to Europe and other countries.
This requires real commitment. This requires real commitment. All right, it killed me to see the television commercial where he said, "I see the world through the eyes of a parent." That is the biggest bunch of bullshit that anybody that could say that has the child protection record that ACS has. And by the way, again, I'm not talking about the people that work in ACS. These people that when they get sent to homes like that, and the foster parent gets the idea that the meal ticket might be leaving, they've often been attacked. Okay, it's a thankless job done by people that just want to help, and they're not being shown how to help properly. And every once in a while, well, we'll fix it. We'll change the name. You could take the best house that there is and put a new coat of paint on it, but if the foundation is weak, it's still going to collapse later on.
But as you know, these things are said at the time because the news media is there. There's pressure on the mayor. They need a soundbite, so they'll say something, and days go by, and again, nothing changes because then there's going to be a news story or something else that's going to take the place and take the attention away to divert it again away from what needs to be fixed. And again, it's 10, 20, 30 years, and nothing has changed.
That's our fault because we let them get away with it. And anybody that wants to help, we're the Child Protection Constituency at gmail.com. At this point in time, or you can find me on Facebook. I have an author page and I have a regular page. All you need to do is tell me. I mean, look, people give rants. This is the common thing, and I know everybody's on Facebook, right? You see somebody that's beaten a kid to death or stabbed a child, and you look at it and you get so angry, and you say, "Man, if I had that bastard in some room somewhere, you know what I do to him? You know what that is? That's nothing. That's a rant. Because what you did, you had that little attack of conscience because I shouldn't let this go by. You don't know what to do and you rant. And you know what? Everybody does that. All right, I'm not being critical because I used to do that.
I do too.
One day I made a comment about that, and Andrew wrote back to me, "What good does that do?" And that's how he talks, by the way. He's absolutely terrifying. Whenever you talk with him, I feel like I'm being my father is checking my homework. Is that right? So he has Batman beat by him. Anyway, he actually said to me, "Hey, pal, what good does that do?" And I was indignant about that. I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean? What good does that do?" Well, you're not going to do that, are you? Listen, if it was legally permissible, I would stand at the edge of a cliff and I would throw those things off one at a time until one of them was bad enough to take me with it. And then I got a line full of friends that would take my spot. But we can't do that, all right? You can't even, it doesn't do anything. There are all these hollow, you give them the death penalty. All right, let's give them the death penalty so that we throw more money into the system and they get groupies and they get to have marriages and they become celebrities and you have white-collar law firms defending them on principle. Nonsense. That you can actually educate yourself about this. You can do something about it. You can vote. You can write a letter to the politician. What are you going to do?
Write to your local congressman and ask them, next time that they want your vote, ask them, okay, you want my vote? You tell me what you're going to do to fix this problem because we need to protect the children. Okay, children are not children forever. They're children for a very short period of time. But once the damage is done, that damage, okay, continues with them into their adulthood. And what becomes of them next could be really frightening. Either they're going to look to try and adapt and cover it up and hide it and basically hold on to the secret, or abuse themselves, or in turn become a predator.
Right.
Okay, because if you don't fix it, somewhere along the line it's going to come out. You can't internalize something forever.
Well, that's another key thing. Child protection is crime prevention. Okay, not all criminals were abused as children, but a certain amount, a good portion of them were. They lose it. Look, a baby, when a baby is born, is a sociopath. What does the baby know? Its own wants and its own needs.
And immediate gratification.
Right.
Yes.
For the baby to become a full-fledged member of the human race, we have to teach it empathy, concern, okay?
Compassion.
Right.
Right.
When you take that away to certain degrees, sometimes it's not there at all. There are some very frightening people walking around. When you do that, you're creating the person that when you're 70 is going to take your pocketbook or your wallet and throw you down a flight of stairs. So it should be another appeal to politicians, but it never is because no one has the vision of saying, I'm going to make things better for people in 20 years. That's another point.
Now, you've been doing writing. I know in speaking with you, you said that you're an author. The books or the short stories that you write, do they have anything to do with any of the topics that you hold dear to you, such as children's rights?
Yes, I try to incorporate them. I have a collection of short stories and a novella that were done around one group of characters. I have a novel that was just completed for another group of characters. I am in talks with a couple of publishing agencies. My mentor, my rabbi, has sort of advised me to go the self-publishing route, even though I have offers, because he feels it's the wave of the future.
And the
mentor
that you're speaking of is Andrew Vax.
I would neither confirm nor deny that. I would say this, a lot of people that know me, all you have to do is look at my Facebook posts. I have enormous respect and admiration for the man. I'm not an idiot. I have 30 years experience. When I was in the first grade, I had the reading level of a graduating senior in high school, and I have a certain degree of common sense despite years of blunt force trauma. I'm not an idiot.
But
If someone had a better idea than what he has, I'd say no problem. But so far, no one has matched him for having logical, simple solutions to complex problems.
I know that even from before I met you, and it's funny how we're separated by 6 degrees of separation, I had mentioned it to you. Coming out of law school, it wasn't enough just to, read about case law and then eventually, practice as an attorney. One of my my loves of reading is to read crime novels and murder mysteries, and I came across the writing of Andrew Bax years ago when I first came out of law school, and I was mesmerized and enthralled by the books and his style of writing,
Yeah.
that I would pick up one, and as soon as I would finish one, I would look to see, his whole list, to see what other books he wrote, to constantly stay up on top of a lot of the reading. And I just became so amazed by the way he writes, because he writes about what's important to him through the characters, through the stories, and Mr. Bax is very clearly an advocate for protecting
We call
children.
that truth through fiction, and I have taken that trait from him and incorporated it myself into my writing. I draw based on I try to draw a picture based on experience, and I dispute with anyone that could read anything I've written so far and tell me, well, that couldn't happen.
Well, did you bring a sample with you today?
I
of
did
your writing?
actually, and this is actually a first. I hope our friend the producer has the ability to edit, because I've never read my own work before. I've posted it on Facebook. I've never read it before, and this is the first time.
So everyone, now you're actually going to be gifted by John Curley reading to you.
Gifted or plagued. This is from the novel Bonds that I'm working on. The title comes from the bonds between the people, the characters, and stories. And this is an excerpt. A long time ago in a galaxy, I'm sorry, wrong paper.
Dun dun dun.
My brothers all did well financially. They went home to their families, and while they had worries, they weren't my worries. If I hadn't detached, I'd be in a psych ward or afflicted with multiple sicknesses, including poverty. It might have been an easier life. Maybe the magic would not have rubbed off so fast. Maybe there would be some of it left. I had been raised that you respected the authorities, and some of the time that respect was deserved. Some of the time it wasn't. One case I thought about often happened a few years ago. Despite the overwhelming evidence we had as to the danger of this child being with the mother, the judge had forced a settlement of joint custody. It's easy for them to do that, schedule a trial over the course of a long period of time, threaten and intimidate the parties off the record. The child had told his law guardian, "Mommy yells at me, she hits me, Mommy sleeps all day, Mommy talks funny and sometimes cries." Law guardians in New York were supposed to be independent counsel for the children. They were appointed in cases where there were allegations of abuse. Great idea. Then it was changed to they had to specifically advocate for the wishes of the child. Not a great idea. What 10-year-old is not going to want to watch TV instead of doing homework? There was no formal training needed to be a law guardian. They were supposed to be selected on a rotating basis. Problem was, if you didn't go along with what the judge wanted, maybe you wouldn't get a case for a while. Or maybe the law guardian just thought that. The mother, driving with the child, bumped the curb and hit a pole while she was drunk and on Xanax. There was a ton of evidence that it said that mother was a danger to the child. The judge didn't care. The little Italian sports car that the woman had gotten for herself as a present after the divorce, when it hit the pole, was 2 feet off the ground. The car disintegrated. The law guardian was too busy flirting with the mother, pontificating about how he was raised by his mother. Parenting was in the genes. Neither the judge nor the child's attorney paid any attention to the forensics. The judge didn't like having to squeeze a trial into his schedule. The father had come to see me. I saw the punch he threw at me coming from a mile away. He didn't know how to throw a good punch. I didn't move out of its way. He was big and he was strong. When it hit me, it rocked me back good, like being hit with a club. He opened up an old cut I had over my left eye. I heard that dull thud you hear when you get hit and the heat and disorientation that accompanied an impact like that. I felt the warmth of my blood as it flowed down my face. My hands balled up instinctively, but I kept them at my sides. He cried and kept yelling at me I didn't save his son. The guys in the office all moved on him, but I waved them off. After he hit me and he stopped yelling, he looked at me, and the rage washed out and was replaced by a deep, soul-crushing grief. He kind of fell into me, weeping. I put my arms around his shoulders. His tears and my blood mingled on the front of my shirt. A few days later he came back. He had owed me money. I told him I didn't want it. He asked me to give it to some charity for abused children then. He apologized. He was quiet. No tears, no anger, just a sadness. He told me that he knew I did everything I could. I wasn't so sure. I couldn't think of anything else I could have done, but I must have missed something. He left an envelope thick with cash on my desk. Later that week, he killed both the judge and the law guardian. The law guardian he killed in the morning in his home. He knew he couldn't get the gun past the metal detectors at court, so he waited near where the judges parked their cars. He shot the judge twice, then himself. The judge recovered, sort of, but then retired from the bench. They gave him a standing ovation, I'm told, at his retirement dinner. He died 3 months later. He is still talked about like he was a hero. I once read somewhere about something called the theory of many worlds. Quantum mechanics said that it was a good possibility that for every possible reality, there was a reality. It had something to do, I think, with an electron being in multiple places at the same time. Somewhere I was in the family business, and somewhere that kid was still alive.
The stories that you write, these are all bad. It's an excellent story, by the way.
Thank you. I actually draw on cases that I've worked on, and I think about some of the people that we've dealt with over the years, and sometimes things haven't gone the way they could. To my knowledge, I'm not advocating anybody goes out and shoots a judge or a law guardian.
Or
That's
a lawyer.
wrong. We're not, no lawyer, no, we're not vigilantes. Nothing like that. It's that part was pure fiction, but the rest of the things that occurred were plausible. And in one of the instances, we actually managed to stop something like that from happening.
Well, with a little bit of time left, I wanted to ask you something. Okay. Do you see, through your experience with the courts in New York, and possibly in other states with cases that you've handled, do you see in the next few years any significant changes being made with any of the politicians or any of the courts for any of the laws to change? We have to advocate for the
I
children.
don't. I see the opposite. I see a trend now among judges to try to force joint custody. I would love for anyone, and you don't have to have any experience in this, please tell me if you have a man, for example, or a woman that is abusing their spouse openly in front of the child. Please tell me how they can co-parent. How does that work?
They can't, but you know something, the fact
But
that they're
that's-
abusing each other in front of the child, and that's already
Right.
giving, it's damaging to the
Right,
child.
but the judge, there are judges that are forcing joint custody, because that's what's done in California, and it means an easy way out, okay? How can you have joint parenting when you have one of the, I've seen men and women, and by the way, there's plenty to say about both, okay? I've seen men and women that were horrible to their children and were abusive to their spouse, and I sit there dumbfounded with the idea that they can parent together. It doesn't work. You know, people have to make decisions, and they have to make decisions in the best interest of the child.
Well, that's what the courts are supposed to do. If you remember, we learned in law school, it's BIC. Family courts, the courts are supposed to work in what's known as the best interest of the child. The courts are supposed to take on the role of being, the parent, because if the parents themselves in the home can't make the correct decisions to protect the child and for the child, then the court has to step in and take on that parental role. But if they're still looking to inject both parents into raising the children together in the same household, they're not doing an effective job.
No.
In fact, they're continually hurting the child.
Yeah, yes. And it's done frequently. People don't even know how judges get elected in this state. People don't have a clue as to what it takes to become a judge. And you know what that is? Here it is, ladies and gentlemen, the secret to becoming a judge. Be a lawyer, pay off somebody in whatever party controls that particular borough or county, and you can run for judge probably unopposed, or you'll get appointed judge somewhere, know somebody, And that's how we end up with real estate lawyers as family court judges. It's insane. People don't even know that, all right? Before, you know what? Court is open. Even, believe it or not, family court, divorce court are open to the public.
I correct you on that. All courts are open to the public. So on
Correct.
any given day, if any of you have nothing to do one day, go into your local courthouse and you can walk into a courtroom and you can actually sit there on the bench
Yes.
in the back and you can listen to any and all types of cases being handled in the courtroom. And you can see for yourself that when you're in court and you're actually watching and listening to what's going on, it is not at all the way the courts are portrayed in a 1-hour television
Right.
series. Because that,
No.
my dear, is not reality.
Well, I know you're running short on time, but if I could make one last comment on
Sure.
it. It's a gamble when you go into the family court or divorce court system, okay? It's multiple rolls of the dice. First roll of the dice, are you going to find a good lawyer? Because your friend says, this guy's the best, but he happened to have a divorce that there were absolutely no issues and no kids, that's the best lawyer. So you're going to roll the dice to see whether or not you come up with a good lawyer. Then you're going to roll the dice, God forbid forensics need to be done, and you're going to see whether or not you get somebody that's good at the forensic job that they do, okay? Then you're going to roll the dice again and see if the law guardian appointed knows what they're doing. And then you're going to roll the dice a final time and see whether or not the judge is a fair judge.
Okay, well, just in response to that, at any point in time, if you have a law guardian that you're not happy with, you can make an application to the court to have the law guardian changed. If you're not happy with your attorney, okay, even if you're paying the attorney, and if the attorney is appointed to you from court, if you're not happy with the attorney and you feel that there is no communication, you can actually make an application again to the court. I need a different court-appointed attorney. He or she is not representing me in my best interest. But it looks like are we short on time? Okay, well, right now, I would like to thank everybody for joining me today with my guest, John Curley. My name is Pamela Roth. I am the attorney. If anybody would like to contact me, I can be reached at my office is at 2427 Coney Island Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11235. And my phone number is 212-766-8484. That is 212-766-8484. I am an attorney licensed in the state of New York, and I handle all types of negligence cases, criminal defense cases, and civil rights violations. And today I would like to thank John Curley, and you could find him on his Facebook page at John Curley and Associates.
John Curley, Curley, and John A. Curley is my author page.
And check him out. And again, reach out to your local elected officials and tell them how important it is to make changes for the protection of children, for children's rights.
And if you don't know, ask me and I'll tell you what to put in the letter.
Contact me, contact John Curley. And Jim, thank you, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you both for having me.
Thank you.